My doctor calls it a unique combination of agoraphobia and claustrophobia. I'm afraid of wide open spaces and I'm terrified of being enclosed. It means my world has shrunk to the four walls of my apartment. She gives me Ativan for the panic attacks that leave me gasping for air on the floor. Before the trip, the outdoors was my sanctuary. I was a college student and I went to the Pine Barrens on a solo camping trip to prove to myself that I was strong and independent. I found a place that was older and stronger than any human will, a place that showed me how small and fragile I really was. I went there to feel free, and instead, I learned the meaning of being trapped. After a few hours of hiking, I stumbled upon a clearing that felt wrong. It was a perfect circle about 50 feet across, and the ground was swept completely clean of pine needles and leaves down to the bare, sandy soil. In the exact center stood a single withered oak sapling. It was too deliberate, too manicured to be natural. It felt like a stage or an altar. A primal part of my brain screamed at me to turn back, but the strange, stark beauty of the place was mesmerizing. Ignoring my instincts, I decided to make camp there, right in the middle of that unsettling perfection. As I pitched my tent, I had the distinct and unnerving feeling of being on display, as if I were the main attraction in a silent, empty amphitheater. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows, I noticed the trees at the edge of the clearing. They weren't just growing in a circle. Their branches were twisted and woven together. Thick, living branches from one tree were interlaced with the branches of his neighbors, forming a dense, latticework wall that rose high into the air. It was a living cage, a perfectly constructed dome of wood and leaves. There were no gaps, no clear paths out. I had walked into it without even realizing it. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. It was the sterile silence of a sealed room. The feeling of being trapped became a physical weight pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. I awoke in the dead of night to a faint, scraping sound. It was the sound of bark rubbing against bark. I peered through the mesh window of my tent. The moon was full, bathing the clearing in a ghostly silver light, and the trees were moving. It wasn't a sway of the wind. There was no wind. They were slowly, deliberately bending inward, their woven branches groaning as they tightened, reaching for each other to close the last remaining gap of sky directly above me. They were finishing the cage. I saw faces in the gnarled bark, long, screaming, silent faces. The forest was alive, and it was building my tomb around me. A guttural scream tore from my throat. I slashed my way out of the tent with a knife and scrambled frantically at the living wall of branches, thorns, and twigs, tearing at my skin and clothes until I found a weak spot and squeezed through. They say a hunter found me wandering on a fire road at dawn, incoherent and bleeding. Dr. Chen tells me I experienced a micro-sleep event, a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and dehydration. She says the forest couldn't have moved, but she doesn't have the deep, criss-crossing scars on her arms and back from clawing my way out of a cage that should not exist. Now, I can't stand to be near trees. A park is a place of horror. A potted plant in a corner can trigger a wave of panic. I live in a high-rise apartment, as far from the ground as I can get. I am a prisoner of my own fear, but it's a prison I built myself. It's better than the one the woods were building for me, because in my prison, I have a lock on the door. The one in the Pine Barrens didn't.
Dr. Evans says I have schizophrenia with a focus on auditory hallucinations. It's a clean, simple diagnosis that fits neatly in a medical chart. He prescribed Abilify, a pill I take every morning that makes the world feel like it's wrapped in cotton. Before all this, I was a bird watcher. I found solace in the quiet patience of the woods, in identifying the subtle variations in a sparrow's song. I went to the Pine Barrens to find the rare pine warbler, to sit in silence and just listen. That's the irony. I went into the woods to listen, and I heard something that has made me terrified of silence ever since. I now live in a small, white-walled room in a quiet facility upstate, but the quiet here is different. It's a dead quiet. The quiet in the pines was alive, and it was listening to me. The first day was perfect. I hiked deep into the Wharton State Forest, far from any marked trails. The unique silence of the pines settled around me, broken only by the wind and the occasional bird call. The first sign that something was wrong was a familiar call, a northern cardinal, but the pitch was slightly off, metallic and distorted, like a poor recording played on a cheap speaker. I dismissed it as an echo, a trick of the landscape, but then I heard it again, closer, and this time it ended with a wet clicking sound that no bird on earth makes. An unsettling quiet fell afterward, not just the absence of noise, but a heavy, expectant silence. All the natural sounds of the forest had been snuffed out, as if every living creature was holding its breath, waiting. That night, the real terror began. I was zipped inside my small tent, reading by the light of a headlamp. Outside, I heard the distinct zip of a zipper, the exact sound of my backpack's main compartment. But my pack was inside the tent with me. My blood ran cold. I sat frozen, listening. A few minutes later, I heard a cough, a dry, hacking sound that was a perfect imitation of the one I'd had all week from a lingering cold. It was my cough, mirrored back at me from the oppressive darkness. It knew my sounds. It was learning me. I turned off my headlamp, plunging myself into darkness, thinking it might make me invisible. It didn't matter. The thing outside didn't need to see me. It was already listening to the frantic, terrified rhythm of my own heart. The psychological break came around 2 a.m. I was huddled in my sleeping bag, shaking uncontrollably, when I heard my own voice, clear as day, call out from about 20 yards away. "Hello? Is anyone there?" It was my voice, with my exact inflection, my tone of nervous curiosity. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over me. It was playing a recording of me from earlier in the day when I thought I heard another hiker. Then, a moment later, I heard a whisper, a perfect copy of my own terrified muttering from just an hour before. "God, please, just go away." It was replaying my fear back to me. It wasn't a monster that wanted to kill me. It was an intelligence that wanted to dismantle my sanity piece by piece. It was a predator that fed on psychological terror, and it had found a feast. I don't remember running. I just remember the dawn and finding myself on a gravel road, my clothes torn, my face bleeding. The rangers who found me said I was in shock, babbling about a voice in the woods that stole my own. Now Dr. Evans tries to convince me that this mimic was the first manifestation of my illness, my own mind fracturing and projecting my voice into the world. But he doesn't understand. A hallucination is a trick of the mind. What I heard was a performance. It was a malevolent, unseen artist, and I was its instrument. I take the pills, I nod in my sessions, but I know the truth. Something lives in the deep silence of the pines, and it has a perfect memory. And some nights when the medication wears thin, I still hear it, whispering my own worst fears back to me in my own voice.
They call it schizoaffective disorder. It's a neat label for what happened to me out there. It means the doctors think the woods didn't do this to me. It means they think this was always inside me, waiting to break out. I take my antipsychotics, my mood stabilizers. They make me feel numb, which is better than feeling what I felt that night. Before this, I was an experienced hiker. I prided myself on my sense of direction. I went to the Pine Barrens for a multi-day solo hike to test my skills, to feel that thrill of self-reliance. I went off trail, following a small stream, looking for a truly untouched piece of wilderness. The deeper I went, the stranger the woods became. The trees were twisted into unnatural shapes, and the ground was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled all sound. It was eerily quiet. By late afternoon on my second day, I knew I was lost. My GPS had no signal, and my compass was behaving erratically. I decided to make camp and try to backtrack in the morning. As I was clearing a spot, I started noticing things, small, deliberate things that were deeply unsettling. Bundles of black feathers and animal teeth tied to tree branches with strips of red cloth. Piles of stones stacked in patterns that were clearly not natural. And carved into the bark of a large pine tree was a symbol, like a spiral with a single unblinking eye in the center. It felt ancient and deeply wrong. I felt a primal urge to leave, to run, but I had no idea which way to go. The sun began to set, and the woods, which had been silent, now seemed to be humming with a low, vibrant energy. As darkness fell, the whispering started. It wasn't in English. It was a dry, sibilant language that sounded like dead leaves skittering across stone. It seemed to come from all directions at once, from the trees themselves. I sat in the center of my campsite, my back against my pack, clutching my hunting knife. I could see movement in my peripheral vision, quick, dark shapes flitting between the trees, always just out of the direct line of my headlamp's beam. They were small, humanoid, but their movements were jerky and unnatural, like broken marionettes. I didn't dare venture out of my small circle of light. I felt like a castaway on a tiny island surrounded by a sea of whispering, chittering darkness filled with things that were waiting for my light to die. The most terrifying moment was when the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was worse, filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. I held my breath, listening. Then I heard a new sound, directly behind me, just outside the range of my light. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged through the pine needles, and then a low, wet, guttural laugh. It was the sound of pure, ancient amusement. It was the laugh of a predator that had cornered its prey and was enjoying the fear. I didn't see what it was. I didn't want to. I just broke. I screamed, grabbed my headlamp, and ran in a random direction, plunging into the darkness. I ran until my legs gave out, all the while feeling its unseen eyes on my back, hearing that wet, chuckling sound echoing in my mind. A park ranger found me 2 days later, miles from where I had entered the forest. I was suffering from dehydration and exposure, and I was talking nonsense about symbols and whispering shadows. They took me to a hospital, and from there to a psychiatric ward. My doctor says I had a psychotic episode, that I created these entities as a manifestation of my own fear of being lost. But I have the scars, and I still have the dreams. In my dreams, I'm back in those woods, and I see what was laughing. It's tall and made of sticks and mud and shadow, and it has that single spiral eye. It never speaks. It just watches me. I know it's not a hallucination. There are things in those woods, old things, that don't like to be found. I went looking for wilderness and found their church, and they are not forgiving gods.
My therapist, Dr. Aris, calls it an auditory hallucination brought on by acute stress and environmental suggestion. He has a clinical name for everything. He prescribed me Seroquel for the paranoia and the insomnia, but the pills just muffle the world. They don't erase the memory of the sound. Before that night, I loved the Pine Barrens. I saw it as a beautiful, misunderstood wilderness. I was an arrogant weekend survivalist, convinced I knew its secrets. I went out there to get away from the noise of the city, to find silence. I pitched my tent near the ruins of an old bog iron furnace. feeling smug and completely at peace. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. The silence I found was deep and ancient. I had no idea that by nightfall I would be begging for the noise of a traffic jam, for a car alarm, for anything other than the sound that broke me. The change began at dusk as the sun bled out behind the gnarled pitch pines. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was like a switch was flipped. The evening chorus of crickets and frogs just stopped all at once. The silence that replaced it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, of the blood rushing in your ears. I was sitting by my unlit fire pit when I heard the first noise. It was a snapping twig, far too heavy for a deer or a fox. I grabbed my maglite, my heart starting to thud against my ribs, and scanned the impenetrable wall of trees around my clearing. There was nothing there. But the feeling of being watched was suddenly overwhelming, a physical pressure on the back of my neck. The woods were no longer neutral, they were hostile, and I was the intruder. Then came the scream. It wasn't the shriek of a fox or a bobcat. I know those sounds. This was something else entirely, a sound that violated the laws of nature. It started as a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the sandy soil and up into my bones. Then it climbed into a high-pitched, piercing scream that tore through the air like hot metal. It was a sound of pure agony and bottomless malice all at once. It was so loud it made my teeth ache. I dropped my flashlight and scrambled backward into my tent, fumbling to zip it closed as if a thin sheet of nylon to protect me. Then I saw it, just for a second, silhouetted against the dying light, a tall, stooped figure at the edge of the clearing. It had long, spindly limbs and what looked like huge, leathery wings folded against its back. It took one step toward my tent, and a scream ripped through the night again, this time closer, so much closer. I didn't pack up my gear. I abandoned everything. I crab-walked out the back of the tent, sliced a hole in the fabric with my pocket knife, and ran. I ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping my face, the unholy scream echoing behind me, sometimes seeming to come from the left, sometimes from the right, as if it was flanking me. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran toward where I thought the road was. Every shadow was the creature. Every rustle of leaves was its approach. I remember falling, my hands digging into the cold, sandy earth and just sobbing, convinced I was about to be torn apart. I finally stumbled onto the dirt road, my lungs on fire, and sprinted the last half-mile to my car. I have no memory of driving home, only of the scream playing on a loop in my head. Now I live in a world of noise. I can't be in a quiet room. The Seroquel is supposed to stop the auditory hallucinations, but it doesn't. Every time the wind howls, I hear that shriek. A car's brakes squealing, a child screaming in a playground, it all morphs into that sound. Dr. Era says my brain is replaying a traumatic memory. He says the Jersey Devil is a folk tale, a myth. But he wasn't there. He didn't hear that sound that came from a throat that never was meant to exist. He didn't see the shape of its wings against the sky. They tell me I'm safe, that I'm just sick. But I know the truth. I went looking for silence in its woods, and it showed me what real silence sounds like. And now it has made sure I will never find peace again. My diagnosis is dissociative fugue with elements of paranoid delusion. That's the official story anyway. It's what my doctor, Dr. Miller, tells my family to explain why I can no longer leave the house and why I've covered all the windows in my study. He gives me Xanax for the panic attacks, but no pill can make me unsee what I saw in the heart of the pines. I was a history buff, an amateur photographer. I went into the woods looking for the ghost town of Harrisville, wanting to capture images of the paper mill ruins being reclaimed by nature. I found the trail easily enough. The late afternoon sun was beautiful, filtering through the pine canopy, lighting up the crumbling stone walls. It felt melancholic, peaceful. I was so engrossed in my photography that I didn't realize how quickly the sun was setting or how the air had grown cold and still. As dusk settled, a thick, unnatural fog began to roll in, hugging the ground and swallowing the ruins. It was strange. The air had been perfectly clear moments before. My compass started spinning erratically. I told myself it was iron deposits in the ground, a known phenomenon in the area. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound. Clang. 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 It sounded like a blacksmith's hammer. I thought it must be another hiker, maybe someone camping nearby. I called out, "Hello?" The hammering stopped. In its place, I heard the faint sound of children laughing. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold air crawled up my spine. The ruins were supposed to be deserted. They had been for over a century. I rounded a large, vine-covered wall and froze. The fog had thinned in this one area, revealing a scene that was impossible. The town wasn't in ruins anymore. The mill was whole, its water wheel turning slowly. Small wooden houses stood intact, smoke curling from their chimneys. People, dressed in simple 19th century clothing, were walking through the streets. They were translucent, like figures in an old faded photograph, going about their evening chores. I was looking into the past. I was paralyzed, a mixture of awe and absolute terror rooting me to the spot. Then a little girl with a ribbon in her hair, who had been rolling a hoop down the dirt street, stopped. She turned her head slowly and looked directly at me. Her face was pale. Her eyes were dark, empty holes. She pointed a shimmering, transparent finger right at me. The moment she saw me, the illusion shattered. Every single translucent figure stopped what they were doing and turned to face me. The pleasant, ghostly scene became a tableau of horror. Their faces were no longer benign. They were hollow, gaunt, and filled with a cold, spectral fury. They were angry that I, the living, had intruded upon their spectral loop. The children's laughter turned into thin, reedy whispers that slithered through the fog. They started to drift toward me, not walking but floating over the ground, their empty eyes fixed on mine. I turned and ran, a strangled scream caught in my throat. I ran from the town that wasn't there, the whispers of the dead chasing me through the dark, fog-choked woods, promising that I would join them soon. Dr. Miller says I got lost, experienced hypothermia, and my mind created a vivid hallucination to cope with the stress. A waking dream, he calls it. But I know what I saw. I have the scratches on my arms from running through the underbrush for hours in a blind panic until I hit a paved road. Now when I close my eyes, I see her face, the little girl with the empty eyes. I see the whole town turning toward me. They know I saw them, and I feel like I'm being watched constantly, that if I look out a window at the right time, I'll see them standing across the street, shimmering and waiting. I am a prisoner in my own home because I stumbled into a town of ghosts, and they followed me back.